In the name of God, who is love, beloved, and love overflowing. Amen. As you all know, the world lost a brilliant mind, an environmental activist, and a deeply gentle and spiritual soul this week by the name of Jane Goodall. She was an amazing woman with many, many accomplishments under her wing before her death at the grand old age of 91. In her own right, she was a bit of a rebel, which of course I very much appreciate. One of her rebellious acts was that instead of assigning numbers to the chimpanzees she studied, she named them. Now, of course, her male colleagues thought that was absurd. I could just hear the talk in the back rooms. Well, that's what you get with a woman scientist, right? But that didn't concern her. She went right ahead and named every chimpanzee that she worked with. David Graybeard, Goliath, Humphrey, Gigi, and Flo, amongst many other names. What's a little animosity between colleagues anyway? What those scientists just didn't understand was that Goodall's unique position as a person of deep spirituality, which few at that time in the world of science really embraced. Her spirituality wasn't based on doctrines or dogmas, but as a direct result of the Spirit of God touching her heart personally. I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but Jane Goodall was a mystic. I mean, you can't spend all that time in the rainforests, all that time alone with no technology, no DoorDash, no McDonald's, no flashing lights. You can't be in that kind of a situation for hours and days and weeks and months on end without really coming in touch with a power greater than yourself. Well, she was a mystic for that reason, but there was another reason as well. She spoke of an experience. I really don't know how many people know this, but she spoke of an experience she had at Notre Dame Cathedral. She said it was perhaps the closest she'd ever come to experiencing ecstasy. Speaking about that experience, she said she just couldn't believe that the chance of gyrations of bits of primeval dust that had led up to that moment in time, the cathedral soaring high in the sky, the collective inspiration and faith of those who caused it to be built, the advent of Johann Sebastian Bach, the brain, his brain, that translated truth into music, and the mind that could, as hers did, comprehend the whole inexorable progression of evolution. She said, since I cannot believe that this was the result of chance, she said, I have to admit, anti-chance. She said, I have to admit this, and so I must believe in the guiding power of the universe. In other words, I must believe in God. Now, there are few scientists that would say that even today, but boy, back then, that was pretty radical. So when she just couldn't bring herself to just assign a number to a chimpanzee, it was due to the fact that in her heart, she believed that both humanity and all living creatures were connected and worthy of care, protection, and a healthy sense of respect. To give a number to a chimpanzee would be tantamount to claiming that a living, sentient being was nothing more than a number. As I thought about this, it made perfect sense that she would be of that opinion because of her long days spent in solitude studying these primates and in the rainforests and other remote places. She had plenty of time to think while she studied. In point of fact, my opinion is that Jane Goodall was a contemplative, worshiping in the cathedral of the natural world. And the more I thought about Goodall this week, the more I thought she and the saint whose life we are celebrating today, St. Francis of Assisi, had a lot in common. Goodall may not have lived as a religious hermit in a cave, but the similarities in their attitudes toward all living beings matched that of St. Francis of Assisi. Both Goodall and Francis lived in such a way that they both recognized the miracle of life and the glory of God in every aspect of all sentient beings, not just human beings. Francis spread the good news of Jesus Christ by caring for the poor and the sick and the lonely. Goodall spread the good news of the importance of conservation. Both had a deep belief in the goodness of creation and the creativity of a God who frankly is beyond definition, God who is beyond being put in a box. Think about how many centuries the Christian church spoke about the earth as disposable, frankly, did not appreciate the gift of life in this world. The point for them was going to heaven, going to heaven, going to heaven. It was like slapping God in the face, so to speak, for this beautiful, beautiful creation and life. Where Goodall had her experience in Notre Dame Cathedral and in the great outdoors, Francis had his experience in a tiny little broken down church in Assisi where he heard God speak to him in his heart. Rebuild my church, for you see it's fallen into decay. I'm sure at first he believed that God was speaking about that little particular building, because he certainly did undertake fixing it up as much as he could. But in time, as he grew in maturity, he realized he was called to build up the community of followers of Jesus, whomever he came in contact with and wherever they came in contact with, be they two-legged or four-legged, by living the gospel for everyone to see. As you all probably have heard before, he would preach to the birds. As you all probably heard before, there are many, many tales of things such as, speaking gently with a wolf so he would stop bothering the residents of Assisi. Hence the saying attributed to him, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. Surely one cannot speak about St. Francis or Jane Goodall without also speaking about humility. Some of you know the story of St. Francis formally breaking away from the control of his family by stripping down naked as a jaybird, as we would say, right in the town square, with the bishop standing there and everything. He gathered up his clothes, handed it back to his father, and kneeling in front of the bishop, who panicked and put his cloak around him, dedicated his life to the service of Christ. Well, in a way, Goodall gave her life to Christ in her willingness to live for long periods of time in remote areas without what many of us would describe as all the comforts of home, in order to appreciate, study, and learn how to conserve God's glorious creation. Like Francis and Jesus, empathy for others, not detached objectiveness, as with the majority of the scientists of her day, was what led Goodall to the many what she called aha moments she had during her many long hours alone in the rainforest. In an interview with Krista Tippett, she said, "I believe part of being human is a questioning, a curiosity, a trying to find answers, but an understanding that there are some answers that, at least on this planet, this life form, we will not be able to answer." Talk about humility. And I might add, this is a very Episcopal or Anglican way of thinking, where questions are not a sin, but a path to deeper study and deeper understanding. I truly believe these two people were messengers of the good news of Jesus Christ in their own unique way. And though I kind of get the feeling that the blessing of the animals has become kind of hokey over the years, the heart of the matter is gratitude to God for all creation, a very Christian value. And while many of us are well aware of the prayer of St. Francis, I want to end this message today with something that Goodall said about an experience out in the field, which I think St. Francis and Jesus himself would have heartily agreed and had many of these moments. She said, "Lost in awe at the beauty around me, I must have slipped into a state of heightened awareness. It is hard, impossible really, to put into words the moment of truth that suddenly came upon me then. Even the mystics are unable to describe their brief flashes of spiritual ecstasy. It seemed to me, as I struggled afterward to recall the experience, the self was totally, utterly absent. I and the chimpanzees, the earth and trees and air seemed to merge, to become one with the spirit power of life itself. The air was filled with a feathered symphony, the even song of birds. I heard new frequencies in their music and also in singing insects' voices, notes so high and sweet, I was amazed. Never had I been so intensely aware of the shape, the color of the individual leaves, the varied patterns of the veins that made each one unique. Scents were clear as well, easily identifiable, fermenting, overripe fruit, waterlogged earth, cold, wet bark, the damp odor of wet chimpanzee hair, and yes, my own too, and the aromatic scent of young, crushed leaves was almost overpowering. That afternoon, it had been as though an unseen hand had drawn back a curtain, and for the briefest moment, I had seen through such a window. In a flash of not just insight, but outsight, I had known timelessness and quiet ecstasy, sensed a truth of which mainstream science is merely a small fraction. And I knew that the revelation would be with me for the rest of my life, imperfectly remembered, yet always within, a source of strength on which I could draw when life seemed harsh or cruel or desperate. Amen.